Okay. I guess we can start. Hi everyone. Welcome to another session of the Semantics workshop.
Sakshi, we can't hear you.
Sorry?
Oh, I thought you were speaking and we couldn't hear you.
No, I was just saying welcome to another session of the Semantics workshop. We'll start very soon. I think it's 7:30. We can start. If Titi, you would like to share your screen and we can all get into it. If anybody has the bandwidth to keep the video on, that would be great. You can keep your video on, otherwise it's fine. And switch on your mic whenever you have to ask a question, and rest is the same as yesterday.
Can everybody see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thanks all for coming back even after tomorrow. Nice to see you all here. I wanted to flag that yesterday we briefly talked about the interaction of modality with indexicality. So for people who are interested in following that up, of course I won't have time to talk about it, but there's a whole series of works called judge-based semantics, where you have a parameter inside your semantics for this kind of indexical meaning, who is speaking, etc., etc. And starting from Lewis, I think, and then a whole bunch of people in different ways have incorporated that. I use that very heavily in my dissertation and recent paper. So with evidentiality. So, and other people have used it to do other things. So you can check that out. We also briefly mentioned there are probability theory accounts, based accounts of modality. For people who are interested in that, you'll see much more of that in the epistemic domain, because there are degrees of certainty and belief and all of that stuff. So here are some classic works in that area. And then there are some works on probability in the general modal domain. That is Dan Lasseter's dissertation and his recent book. So you can check these things out. I have linked all of these in the references, so you can find them when you get the handout. Okay, before I start, are there any questions for me from yesterday? Okay, so what we are trying to achieve is this goal, right? So within any possible worlds based theory of modality, the foundational issue concerns how to identify the correct set of worlds over which a particular modal expression quantifies, right? So remember, even within modal logic, we had possible worlds. Our set inside our frames were possible worlds. We assumed they're possible worlds. So so within any theory of modality that looks at possible worlds, how do you get the correct set? So you want a quantificational domain for the model. How do you ensure that you're getting the right quantificational domain? Does anyone remember how we accomplished this in modal logic? How did we get a thing for the model to quantify over? How did we get a set of worlds? that the modal quantifies over?
The modal force.
So the force is how many of the worlds the model quantifies over. But tell me, how do you get to those worlds where the model quantifies over?
Propositions are sets of possible worlds, so that way you get those sets of worlds, I guess.
Propositions are sets of possible worlds, but I'm talking about just the model. How does the model, so okay, let me put it this way.
We defined our accessibility relations on the basis of on what quantity of worlds we are quantifying over.
Right. So so the accessibility relation gives us the worlds that we want to quantify over, and then comes in quantification of force. Right. Force is, remember, different from flavor. Okay. So so the way we did it, okay, there's a frame, and there inside that frame there is a relation, and that relation helps us determine the set of worlds the model is going to quantify over. Okay, so if this is a basic idea. If this is unclear, people can ask questions. Okay, I see things in the chat. Yeah, so model frames and the relations inside them. Okay, so that was how we did it in modal logic, and we saw some problems of overgeneration and things like that. So let's move on to seeing what the other school of thought says and what it can achieve. So the other school of thought is called relative modality. Okay, we'll come to in a second why it's called that. But pragmatics plays a more significant role. So for example, if you see this sentence in one, "Tumhe ye kaam karna padega." Okay. So all of you can intuitively tell that there are two readings, right? Or at least two readings, I should say. In view of the requirements that are imposed upon you, you have to do this work to fulfill those requirements. So pay special attention to the things in the brackets. Okay. Okay. And then the other reading is, in view of the goals that you're trying to achieve, you have to do this work to fulfill those goals. So in one case, we have a deontic interpretation where based on your requirements, you're required to do something. Whereas the other, we have a teleological interpretation of padega. So based on what your goals are, you have to do this. So so we looked at how modals can have multiple meanings, and this is one example. Okay. So do people get other readings or not get these readings, or anything I'm missing about padega?
No, I think these are the two readings, right?
Okay. Okay, so in the modal logic approach, padega would be considered to be an example of lexical ambiguity. Okay, so the lexicon stamps padega with two possible meanings, and the context merely sorts out which meaning is being used by the speaker. However, Kratzer 1977 onwards disagrees that disagrees about the fact that you're looking at it as a lexical ambiguity. So she says that things like padega and a bunch of things that you see in English that are ambiguous is a single word. It's very skeletal in its meaning, and the context determines whether the accessible worlds are your requirement worlds or your teleological worlds. Mm-hmm. So for her, the meaning doesn't come from the lexicon itself in the word. It's a very skeletal thing that you assign to the modal, but the context comes in and says, okay, I'm going to interpret it with some worlds that are accessible to me deontically and some that are accessible to me teleologically. Mm-hmm. And I want to highlight that we are going to use some fundamental insights from modal logic. So all of the stuff that you learned yesterday, still keep them in your mind. They'll still many of them will still very much be alive in this school of thought as well. Okay, so relative modality. Why is it called that? So a modal expression in Kratzer's work is doubly relative to two conversational backgrounds. So basically, whenever you come up against a modal word, then you have two sort of things you're accessing. You have a set of accessible worlds, which is often called the modal base, and then you have an ordering on those worlds. So there has to be a way for you to look at those worlds in the modal base and figure out which ones are better than the other. And this is a very important notion. We'll come to it in a second. So the ranking among worlds is required according to Kratzer for modality. So remember, we have looked at these bunch of phrases in view of what we know, in view of what is required, in view of my desires, goals, etc. So we can have these phrases overtly or covertly. But her point is these are the kinds of things that constitute the modal base. You can overtly say them or they're contextually salient, but they are the ones that give you the modal base. So let's see how that works. So she says that things like these clauses are functions, call them F, from worlds to sets of propositions. So given any world, it will output a set of propositions that can be of different types. So maybe a set of propositions that a speaker knows. Maybe a set of propositions that are constitute rules in the world. Maybe the set of propositions that are obligations in the world, et cetera, et cetera. So, or desires. So this function takes you from a world to that kind of set of propositions, and then and that leads eventually to the modal base. So here are some steps. So you first start with this function. So this thing that it takes to decide it is the world that the function is currently working on. So it's looking at the FW and it will give you a set of propositions. So let's say it gives you this set of propositions. Now, does anyone remember this mechanism we used yesterday, this big intersection over this set and what it's supposed to give us? Like, what does this mean? It's very central in modality to understand this mechanism. So basically, this takes you from a set of propositions to a set of worlds. Okay. So this, again, reminding ourselves, is called generalized intersection. So you take an entire set of propositions, and then you intersect all of those propositions. Mm-hmm. So as soon as you intersect them, you come to worlds where all of the propositions are true. So a world in which, let's say 23 is not here, say world 23 is one in which P2 is false, then world 23 cannot be included in this set. So the set can only have worlds where all of the propositions you just intersected are true. Okay. So this is a central idea. So you have a set of propositions, and from there you do generalized intersection on that set, and you get to a set of worlds where all of the propositions are true. Okay. And we need a set of worlds because that's what the model wants to quantify over. Okay, models care about worlds, etc. Right? It wants to see a set of worlds in its meaning. So we can call it. So F is a conversational background that serves as a parameter of interpretation. And generalized intersection over this set provides us a quantificational domain of the model. Do we have any questions about this very fundamental concept?
So I have a clarification.
Mm-hmm.
So suppose we're dealing with, say, deontic flavor. Then what this generalized intersection is, this function, the generalized intersection of this function is doing is that it's giving us the worlds where the rules that apply to, say, W also apply to. Is that true?
Are followed. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Basically. So followed entails, I mean, applies, right? I mean, you can follow it if it applies. So yeah, so it takes you from W to a set of worlds where that is followed. The rules are followed, right?
Right. Okay. Okay.
So is it like making the domain smaller? The set of worlds become smaller and like.
We have not reached a point where we can compare domains, but yes, keep that intuition in mind. We have not reached a point where we see two sets of worlds, right? To see if a domain shrunk or not, you want to see an original set and a later set, right?
Yeah.
We are just at one set of worlds.
Okay.
Yeah, shrinking business has not come in yet because we haven't seen. Okay, yeah. So so nothing about shrinking going from propositions to generalized intersection over those propositions is just okay. I have 4 propositions. I have to make them true. I have to find the worlds where all of them are true, and that will give me the modal base. Okay. Okay. Now I wanted to point out, because we spent so much time yesterday on modal logic, so let's see what are the connections, right? You can tell that there is an easy link between conversational backgrounds and accessibility relations. I mean, even if you look at my wording here, a set of accessible worlds, that should hark back to, you know, accessibility relations. So the easy link can be written as follows. For any worlds U and V, U and V are accessible from the world of evaluation W if and only if every proposition in F of W is true in U and V. So you took your conversational background that you just got from relative modality, and you're talking in terms of accessibility. Okay, so you're bringing together yesterday's understanding of accessibility relations and today's conversational background. Okay, so so then you can go further and say, okay, the set of accessible worlds from W is basically my modal base. Okay, so you started with a set of propositions in a world, and then you intersected them, you got this. It's the same thing as saying that the set of worlds accessible from W. Now, accessibility, of course, depends on what flavor you're taking, episteme, bulletic, deontic, etc. But it's the same idea. Okay. And this is the modal base. So you're basically deriving the modal base even in this system with accessibility relations. Okay. So now let's see how this set constituting the modal base is used as a quantificational domain for a statement. So remember, we have not talked about force so far in this page. We just talked about how to get to a flavor of the modal base. Now you quantify over this, so that's how you get the force. So for example, if I want to say, "Tumhe ye kaam karna padega," put some of it in English. So that statement is true if and only if, for all worlds in the modal base, the proposition in the scope of the modal is true. So for all worlds in the modal base, you do the work.
Hi, Diti. So Shaunak has a question. He's asking, why is it called a modal base?
Oh, I don't know the history of the term. I guess it's just like, you know, it's considered like a domain where you quantify over. Maybe other people know the history better of this term, but yeah, I don't think there's too much. You don't have to worry too much about why it's called that. I mean, it's just a set of worlds. Yeah. Okay, so for things like Parega, you have universal quantification, and then you do things like you know, other models that we looked at. For example, Sakta. Then you have one. You at least have one world in the modal base where you do the work. Okay. So this is your.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So with the semantics of "tumhe ye kaam karna hi padega," you're saying that it's true if and only for all worlds accessible to W, this statement is true. Now, what if we added he, the particle he, and said "tumhe ye kaam karna hi padega"? How does the semantics then differ?
So you're asking about, so beyond the modal. So this is just for the modal, right? And then the scope of the proposition, right? So now you're asking compositionally, if you have a thing like he, what happens, right? So there are many dissertations on he now, I think, but the idea is it's some sort of only, right? And then only will do its own work. I mean, only has its own semantics, right? There can be exhaustification, there can be focus, there can be other things that only brings in. So what happens is the proposition then that the model looks at may be, slightly different from the proposition you're looking at here, maybe modified with only, right? So no other alternatives but this work that you do. You see what I mean?
No, my question was whether he here modifies the flavor of modality in some sense, like he or something. I don't know.
I
No,
had
so
a
he,
similar question.
right. So he only, he cannot compositionally interact with the model, right?
Okay.
So he, think about it this way, only also requires a proposition, right?
Right.
Only also has to compositionally interact with a proposition or set of propositions or whatever your theory of only is, right? So it's nothing to do with the model, let's say, right?
Okay.
So he gives you some sort of exhaustified proposition and then the model will work on it.
Okay.
Right? But yeah, it's good to think about the compositional pieces. Yeah. Do we have other questions about things like this?
I was
Anjali
also
has
a question. So she's asking, does deontic flavor always have universal quantification?
No. Remember that drawing that I had yesterday in the beginning. So every flavor can have both universal and existential. So if I say for English, you may do this, where I say, okay, I'm giving you permission now. You may, whatever, watch TV now. If a mother is telling the child, you may do this now. So that is okay. There exists some world in my model base of requirements, based on requirements, where you are able to watch TV now. Fine. Okay. Doesn't mean in every single world you watch TV now. That will become a requirement, an obligation. So yes, model force can differ with every model flavor.
Aditi, just a follow-up. So we talked about the different kinds of forces and then the different kinds of flavors, and they all interact in different ways, right? So if I were to think of padega in the context of strong necessity, then is that always universal quantification?
Strong necessity, any kind of necessity, strong or weak, is universal quantification. You're right. Yes.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yes. And possibility, like our 7b here, is existential quantification.
Right. Got it. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. So the intuition behind Parega is every single world that you are, whatever you're trying to achieve your goals or you have a requirement, you are required to do the thing that's in the scope of the model. Whereas Sakna is just like, okay, you may, right? Or you might. We saw yesterday a bunch of readings for Sakna, but you will remember they were all existential flavors, so all possibility. Okay.
Excuse me,
yeah.
I had a question similar to what Shaunak asked. So I was thinking, will adding he to padega make it epistemic? I mean, based on what I know, you will have to do this work. तुम्हें ये काम करना ही पड़ेगा.
Can padega have an epistemic flavor? So think without he first. Without he, can it have an epistemic flavor? So think about what someone knows and then they're making an inference. Can they use padega, for example?
I think so. I mean, it's kind of weak, but I think I get that reading.
Right. So first check if you can get it without he, then you should be able to get it with he as well. Okay. Like he will not, so here's the thing I guess I'm trying to say. He will not affect the model flavor.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So if you're wondering about he, and I'm very happy all of you are wondering about he, maybe Aisha put you up to this. I don't know. She's always wondered about he. But anyway, but the point is without a particle, if you're testing if a particle gives you, if a specific particle gives you an interpretation or not, first try it without the particle.
Right.
Can you get that flavor? Okay. And without the particle, if you can get the flavor, then the particle has nothing to do with the flavor.
Okay. but it can make it stronger. I mean,
Yeah, so that might be something like focus, you know, that तुम्हें करना ही
Yeah.
पड़ेगा, or like some sort of, you know, emphasis on.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ojasvi? Yeah.
I had a follow-up doubt on
Mhm.
having an epistemic meaning.
Mhm.
Can this be a possible diagnostic if we can embed this under पता है, मुझे पता है कि तुम्हें काम करना पड़ेगा. In that case, would padega be epistemic based on root clauses, speakers, knowledge?
So look what I'm writing in the chat. So padega, so you want to say work do, autocorrect is constantly correcting my padega. It will not let me write padega. Sorry, hold on. So you want to
Just
say
like P.
P can mean a lot of things in this context.
But given the context, you'll understand. Given its
Okay,
chat.
so pata hai is your embedding verb. So something like no, right? No is your embedding verb. And then you have the embedded proposition, you do the work padega.
Yeah.
So the idea is padega can still be any flavor that you want it to be. So teleological or deontic. You know, so what you're embedding under no is the proposition with the modal having that flavor. You see what I mean? So just because of the embedding verb, the modal flavor doesn't have to change.
Okay.
Right? So I know this is a requirement. Oh no, the hey thing going on. Okay, yes. Whenever I'm not saying the nasal hey, I mean it, okay? Or yeah, forgive me for that. Poor Bengali here, okay? So yes, so what you know is that it's a requirement for you, or you know that it's a goal for you. You see what I'm saying? So you know the whole thing.
Yeah.
So you necessarily don't, there are cases where the attitude predicate interacts with an embedded model. There are cases like that, and languages where that's sort of marked or salient. But I'm just saying it doesn't have to be the case. It can still retain its whatever original flavors of teleological and bulletic. Or no, sorry, teleological and idiotic, and still just knows the whole thing.
I want to follow up on this.
Yeah.
So, does that mean that the clause will not have the embedding clause will not does not necessarily dictate what can be embedded when it comes to modals?
The embedding clause does not dictate what can be embedded, or you mean the attitude verb, the verb, embedding verb?
The embedding verb, yes.
Well, all verbs, embedding verbs have their own complementation requirements, right? Like I will take.
Yes, yeah, yes,
yeah. But it can't, if you're asking if it can dictate, oh, is there a modal in that statement or not? No, it can't.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Because think about it this way, the modal compositionally interacts, and I hope to show you this today, how it compositionally interacts with things around it. But the modal compositionally interacts at the level of the sentence. That's it, the embedded sentence. And then the verb takes the whole thing as its complement. So the verb can't say ki, acha, under there is no modal, or is there a modal, or you know, it just wants whatever its requirement is. Yeah.
Just one last question on this.
Yeah.
This might sound stupid, but if a speaker knows that it's a requirement, isn't there also a requirement which is under knowledge of the speaker, the justified belief you mentioned yesterday? Isn't there always a knowledge layer above that layer?
Thanks, Ojasvi.
When you know that
I have always struggled with this question. Yeah. Okay, if there are rules, don't I know the rules? Okay, if there are desires, don't I know the desires? So isn't it the case that all of these flavors are actually some layer epistemic?
Yes.
If you want to do work in modality, you have to sort of get rid of that question from your head. I'm sorry to say that. But yes, of course, the speaker, if it's using a base of, rules, a base of desires, a base of whatever, of course, the speaker knows. So what happens is at that level, you don't call it epistemic anymore. It's just epistemic you only call in specific cases where everything you're doing in your reasoning is knowledge-based, right? There is no other thing except knowledge. Okay. But yes, with rules and desires and everything else that is a flavor, of course, there is always that layer that I know these are flavors. I know these are rules, or I know these are. But yes, while doing work on this, you have to sort of let that question go. You can't call everything.
You see, you're saying that essentially one has to think of it as like a tacit knowledge, which is not the equivalent of full knowledge. The epistemic knowledge is, there has to be some gradation then in this to be able to put that question aside. Doesn't one have to make a distinction by in terms of what knowledge is involved in epistemic knowledge and fully justified knowledge versus knowing a rule is not the same rule. It's sort of behavioral. It's not the same kind of knowledge as
right. So the way I think people who do accessibility relations or modal bases is that you can access different parts of your knowledge. Let's say if you're only accessing a set of rules and nothing else in your knowledge, then you call it deontic.
Okay.
If you're only accessing desires and nothing else, you see what I'm saying? Like, knowledge can be all pervasive. Yes, we're all struggling with this question. But if you're looking at corners of your knowledge where you're only looking at rules or only looking at, desires, only looking at goals, then you call those things different from an epistemic modal base. Okay, they're teleological.
Can we hold off on questions? It's already 8 and everybody would like to be done
I have a handout, yes, which is long. Yeah. So let me try and get some of it through some of it. Okay, thanks for all these questions. Yeah, these are very good things to think about. Okay, so now, so I wanted to highlight the similarities more. Maybe I won't spend so much time on it, but basically you can write what you just found out with the modal base, etc. You can write it like this, right, as a relation. And then you have your modal operators come in and do their work. Okay, so now this is the idea. So let's move forward with it. So we said this constitutes the modal base, and now comes in the representation of diversity in modal flavors. So here is Kratzer's list of modal bases. I added the last one, which is in the literature, but not necessarily in Kratzer's work here. So basically, if FW is a set of propositions that constitute rules, morals, obligations, and you call the consequent consequently the set of worldview that you get with generalized intersection, you call it deontic modal base. If you're dealing with desires, you call it a bouletic modal base. Goals, teleological, etc., etc. And the last thing that I wanted to add on here is if you are looking at speakers' beliefs in W, then it's called a doxastic modal base. Okay. So basically all of the worlds where the speaker believes P to be true, okay, whatever the belief is, that is called a doxastic modal base. Okay, so and you necessarily distinguish a doxastic modal base from an epistemic modal base, which was here. Right. And they share some qualities. Hopefully today I'll be able to tell you what qualities they share, but they're also different in certain ways. So you can directly use, so what we did is we directly use quantification language in 7, right? We just said for all worlds in my modal base, this has to hold, or for at least one world in my modal base, this has to hold. So this is direct quantification language. Just go in there and you quantify over the worlds. I just wanted to point out, Kratzer does not use, at least in her 1977 work, does not use, and even in 1981, does not use direct quantificational language. What she uses instead are these terms entailment and compatibility, these notions. So how does that work? So the idea is if you're dealing with a necessity model, and let's say alpha is the thing in the scope of the model, then the alpha is the whole thing for the model and the thing in the scope of the model. The thing in the scope of the model is beta. Let's say the proposition in the scope of the model is beta. Together, the meaning of, let's say, a must and a proposition, you must do this work, is something like this. You can write it in proposition talk or you can write it in world talk. Propositional talk means this set, so give me a set of worlds. So the meaning of this whole thing is give me a set of worlds where my set of whatever rules, knowledge, whatever entails that proposition. Okay. So for example, when you see must P entails P, you know, so that is the sort of idea behind that. And you can write it in terms of worlds. So just entailment, you know, you write it in terms of the subset relation. So then you say, okay, my set of generalized, so the set of worlds in my generalized intersection is a subset of that. Means the way you write that, that means it's entailed. So the thing on the right side of the subset is entailed because it can be possibly a bigger set than the thing on the left. Okay, so that's a basic way to write entailment. And she uses this notion in necessity. Whereas with possibility, she uses a different notion. Now you can't say entailed because, for example, you can't say this might happen entails this will happen. Right? You can't go with entailment in possibility with possibility models because you don't know if it will happen or not. Right? There is some world where it happens, but there are also maybe some world where it doesn't happen. So you can't have entailment there. So then what she uses is this notion of compatibility. So this is just written in words, so it's hard to see what do you mean compatibility. So if you look at the world talk, then you see what this means is if you do a union of the sets that you get with generalized intersection and the set of worlds that the proposition constitutes, then basically it shouldn't be an empty set. What that means is the set of worlds that the proposition is and the set of worlds that exist in the generalized intersection. What is Utpal saying? That union should be intersection. Yes, yes. Okay, I'm embarrassed. So you should consider this U to be a cup. So you want to say the intersection of them is not null. Okay. So did I hear someone say something? Okay. So so the idea is if you look at this set of worlds and you look at the set of worlds given to you by the proposition, there has to be something shared by both of them. Okay, so that will be this imagined intersection that I have as a, so this is the product of LaTeX. So in LaTeX, you get the union by writing cup and the intersection by writing cap. And sometimes when you're sleepy, you can write cap for cup and cup for cap, and then you end up with all this. Okay, so the idea is this shouldn't be a null set, right? The intersection shouldn't be a null set. Okay, so the compatibility restriction means that there is at least one world in the speaker's epistemic model base. Let's say we're dealing with epistemic model base where beta is true. Okay, so that's Kratzer's way of writing it, necessity and possibility. So now you may be wondering, okay, we learned a bunch of properties of frames yesterday. So can we apply them in these newly formed modal bases? Remember, they apply to accessibility relations, but can they apply to modal bases? Okay, so they can, and people have described it this way. So now we're looking at properties of modal bases. Reflexivity corresponds to the property of realism. Okay, so realism, so a modal base can be realistic or not. What that means is a conversational background, let's say a modal base F, is realistic if and only if for all worlds in the big set of worlds, that world exists in the modal base, that is generated out of itself. right? So your FW looks at a set of things, set of propositions in W, and then you get generalized intersection. And then basically the world itself has to be in that model base. Okay. Can anyone tell me what kind of model base then this will correspond to? What kind, like bulletic, epistemic, deontic? Think about what kind of accessibility relation satisfied reflexivity. Am I still online or have I been disconnected? Okay, someone is going to speak.
Epistemic.
Why so?
Epistemic, people are saying on the chat group. Or just we says epistemic, Rhythm says
right,
epistemic.
right. Yeah, okay. Yes, so if you are a reflexive accessibility relation, chances are that when you are talking of the same sort of accessibility relation in model-based terms, then you retain that property, right? So we'll see in a second why epistemic model bases are realistic. Okay, and then we talked about the concept of seriality corresponds to the property of consistency. Okay, and this we talked about yesterday. If to rule out inconsistency, there is this condition seriality such that there's at least one world where that rule is, for every W that rule is followed. The set of rules are followed. So conversational background F is consistent if and only if for all W in W, the modal base isn't empty. So remember, if you have an inconsistent set of propositions, you won't be able to generate a set of worlds where all of those propositions are true. Suppose you have P and Q and P is contradictory to Q. You won't find a world where both P and Q are true. So you can never generate a generalized intersection, get a model base out of those propositions. So this property is saying that it can't be empty, so it has to be consistent. Okay. And transitivity corresponds to the property of positive introspection. Now, looking at the time, I will try to make as much sense of this as possible. Let's see how this goes. So positive introspection. A conversational background, F, displays positive introspection if and only if for all W and W prime, okay, a W is missing here, the big W. You can just insert that in your mind. So for all W and W prime in the big W, if W prime belongs in the modal base from generated from W, then the modal base corresponding to FW prime is a subset of the original modal base. Okay, let's see how this works. This is not trivial or natural at all. So you have to, sit and think about it. So Kaufman et al. Put it this way: positive introspection is a requirement that at each world compatible with what the speaker believes. So that is your, your accessibility relation R, let's say. It will take you to a set of worlds where, if you're dealing with a doxastic domain, then it will take you to a set of worlds where the beliefs, your beliefs are compatible with those worlds. In all of those worlds, she has all the beliefs that she actually has at W. Okay. So formally, this means that for each belief world W prime, the speaker's doxastic modal base RW prime is a subset of the actual model base. Now, how on earth is this thing going down? Okay, so let's hear us some examples. So let's say we have a speaker who believes 3 propositions. Okay, they believe that JNU is in New Delhi. Let's call that P1 that the speaker believes. They believe Agra is 40 kilometers from New Delhi, which is not true, but still anyone can believe anything, right? Belief doesn't have to be a fact. So that's P2. And then my neighbor has been stealing my electricity is a third thing this person believes, which is, let's say, P3. So you have P1, P2, P3 in the set FW. Okay. So your RW will be your corresponding modal base, equivalently written as this, which is a set of worlds where all 3 are true, right? So you get this set of worlds, let's say, where all 3 are true. Oh, Yangchen has a question. Yangchen, is your question about this, or should I finish this?
Yeah, you can finish. I'll ask in the end now. It's fine. It was
okay.
I'll ask in
Okay. So now we are ending up with this set of worlds, which is where all of these beliefs are true. Let's say the speaker's doxastic domain. Now look at positive introspection again. It demands that in each world in RW, the speaker has all the original beliefs, that is the set of P1, P2, P3, and possibly more beliefs. So in each of the worlds, W13, W14, and W15, the speaker believes P1, P2, P3, and possibly more. Okay. Therefore, now the accessibility relations from those worlds. So remember, we first went from our world, the world of evaluation, to a bunch of worlds where the doxastic requirement is satisfied. Then we are looking at those worlds, and now we are looking at the accessibility relation, the doxastic accessibility relation from each of those worlds. So think about it this way. Each of those sets of worlds, that is RW13, RW14, RW15, all have to be subsets of the original model base. Why? Why do they have to be subset? Remember, they can, so think about it this way, FW13, it can be bigger than FW. FW14 can be bigger than FW. FW15 can be bigger than FW. So as soon as you have bigger sets of propositions, remember, it's harder and harder to find a set of worlds where all of those propositions are satisfied, right? So if you have more propositions, you will have a smaller set of worlds in the intersection. So if you have more propositions than you originally started with in your world of evaluation, and the set of worlds we got from that, then all of those accessibility relations that you generated from the worlds that you accessed from your original world will have to be subsets. Okay. So you can write positive introspection as follows. For all W prime that exists in my original accessibility relation, which is, let's say, doxastic in this case, we have to have, this is the requirement. So RW for all worlds accessed by my accessibility relation, the accessibility relations from each of those worlds have to be a subset of the original accessibility relation. Okay, because more propositions are possible in each of those worlds that the speaker believes. And this you can see is beautifully equivalent to the property of transitivity with the accessibility relation. Okay, so I don't know if people have questions about this, but I will try to move on. Here is a nice diagram from Kaufman that I have here, and I have explained the stuff here. Basically, the idea is there is a word, this is not proper, this RW prime is not properly contained within RW, which you said you wanted here. Okay, at least you have at least one word which is not inside RW here. So it violates the property of transitivity. It violates, so there is no accessibility link between these things. And so the positive introspection doesn't hold. Okay, so the result is you have a speaker who thinks they might not believe a proposition in this world, but actually believes them because it's compatible. Okay, so all of this is written here. So positive introspection is imposed as a condition on epistemic and doxastic model basis. You can see why, because you want for people to know that they believe something or they know something. So if I believe that the world is round, then I have positive introspection. Okay, I think that I believe that, right? Or if I know the world is round, then I know that I know the world is round. So you have to have the quality, the property of positive introspection, to get as a condition on epistemic and doxastic model basis. Otherwise, you have chaos. You don't know what you believe. You don't know what you know. You don't think you believe what you actually believe, etc. There is also the property of negative introspection, which is a requirement that there should be no world compatible with what the speaker believes, in which she holds any beliefs that she does not actually hold. Okay, so it's a reverse subset relation in 13. In 13, you saw this is the way the subset relation goes. In with negative introspection, it's the opposite. Okay, so Kaufman et al. Provide this very nice table where we can see some properties of accessibility relations that we saw and how they correspond directly with properties of modal bases. So you have your seriality quality, the property, you have that represented as consistency in modal bases. If Rahul is whistling, then here are all the axioms that he wanted yesterday. Okay, I will not try to work through each of these. That will take, an additional hour trying to see how these work. But you can read them as follows, right? Like, so necessarily phi, for example, has to be phi. Okay, and then phi has to necessarily, so the bivalence, the bidirectional arrow means whatever the truth value on one side. Hello? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So whatever is the value of phi, same as the value of necessarily phi. So that's what that means. So reflexivity corresponds to realism. Identity corresponds to total realism. We have not really talked about identity, so we can come back to this if people have questions about it. Positive introspection we just saw corresponds to the accessibility relation property transitivity, and negative introspection is something called euclidity that I don't have time to explain, but it's basically the idea that you cannot have any world compatible with what you believe in which you hold beliefs that you actually don't have, right? So you can't have random extra beliefs floating around, basically, that are not compatible with what you actually believe. Okay. So now, if you look at some of these concepts, it is some combination of these conditions that determine the properties of a particular modal base and distinguishes it from other modal bases. For example, doxastic modal bases, so this is based on speakers' beliefs, are considered to be consistent. So this property has to hold. You have to, if you're a rational agent, basically you're considered to have consistent beliefs. Okay. And you're also assumed to be fully introspective. So both positive and negative introspection has to hold of a doxastic model base. If you have an epistemic model base, then they are consistent, fully introspective, and also realistic. And as all of you pointed out, when I asked earlier, you have to have the property of realism because knowledge is reflexive. So if you know something, you know that you know something in that world. So that world where, so that world itself has to be in your modal base, right? And so that's the property of reflexivity. Okay, and then deontic modal bases are interesting. They are consistent, but they're not usually considered introspective. Although von Stackow has a view on which dynamic or ability-based modal bases should have negative introspection. He argues that, and he says, I'll let you go look at it. There's an argument there that there can be, if you have certain dynamic modal bases, then you can argue for the property of positive introspection not holding, but negative introspection holding. And then deontic modal bases are not considered to be realistic. Okay, so they're usually not considered introspective or realistic. So because we cannot say that if something ought to be the case, it is actually the case in the real world. So you can't have that reflexive relation with rules or permissions or whatever. Okay, any questions still here? I have one last section that I want to get through. But any?
I wanted to ask how exactly do we distinguish between doxastic and epistemic models? So is this what you have just said about them being consistent, fully introspective and realistic, and the other thing? Is this how you formally distinguish between these two models? Because we agree that knowledge is justified through belief, and then doxastic models are about belief in general. So I was confused as to whether one just on a special case of the other or something like that.
So crucially, remember, these are not about the modals, but about the modal basis.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so keep that separate. So the modal words are coming in later. We are just dealing with what will they quantify over? That's the big question, right? And we are sort of preparing the plate for them. Think about it this way. And then the model will come and sit on it later. Okay, so we are preparing the plate, and the plate is this modal basis. So at the level of the modal basis, you have these properties that have to hold for you to call it a deontic modal base or call it an epistemic modal base. Okay. Okay, so third section is on ordering sources. So remember, I told you much earlier, somewhere here, that we have doubly relative semantics for possible world semantics in relative modality, right? So we looked at one so far. We looked at a modal base. We haven't looked at whatever this thing is, right? So let's look at that. Okay, so why do we need that? Why do we need the other thing is the big question. So till now, we have been studying absolute necessity or possibility. Okay, it's absolutely the case that it's necessarily the case, or it's possibly the case that there is a possibility that that. If you look at 1977 Kratzer's work, then you will see she provides us with the notions of modal bases, and with the modal force being entailment and compatibility. However, for both Kratzer 1977 and for modal logic, there are some headaches caused by certain data involving graded or comparative modality. So let's see how. So here are some examples. There is a slight possibility that Hindi speakers will agree with DT's interpretation of Hindi models. So far, we are good. So, so here is slight possibility, right? We don't know what to do with this. Currently in modal logic or in the system we have seen so far, we don't know what to do with slight possibility. Okay, so this is your graded modality. Then you can say things like, it is more likely that a semanticist will worry about modal logic than a phonologist will. Okay, so that is your comparative modality. So here are, so if this more likely, we don't know what to do with it. Okay, so if you only have a set of worlds, then there is no way you can, so without knowing how to compare worlds, you can't do graded modality or comparative modality. So I think I will go over time again. Is that okay, organizers, or should I stop?
I think we can continue for another 10-15 minutes. It should be fine.
Okay. So there is no use of comparison in any of these systems yet. So we clearly need another component. Right? So this notion is not new in this era that these things were being figured out. You had Stolniker and Lewis, sort of arguing about theories of counterfactuals with different things going on in their analysis, but they had the notion of comparative similarity between possible worlds. Okay, that was one of the central things in their analysis. So already that was known that you can have comparative similarity between possible worlds. So the added machinery we want is an ordering between worlds. So we want to be able to order, let's say we take world 1 and world 2, we want to be able to order the worlds to say one is better than the other because of some reason. Now, what is that reason? Okay. So we can, and even before you look at machinery, think about it this way, you can intuitively compare worlds, right? So in the context of this talk, where I'm giving this talk, me sitting in front of my computer and giving the talk is a better world, is a higher ranked world given my goals of giving the talk than a world where I get up and start dancing in the background, right? So that's not a good world where I stop talking and go start dancing for given the goals of what's going on. So we can intuitively say, okay, this is a better world than that because it meets some criteria. So how did I classify one as better than the other? I used another conversational background that allowed me a ranking scheme. Okay, so an ordering source, that is this other conversational background, is a set of propositions in a world that induces a pre-order. So pre-order is a binary relation on a set that's reflexive and transitive. and it induces this pre-order on a set of worlds. So if we assume that there is a conversational background G with a particular flavor, so in W, we assume there is a GW. Remember, our FW was our modal base. Now we have an ordering source called GW. Okay, so now we have FW and GW. These are the two conversational backgrounds. Okay, so this GW this is the way you write it. Basically, it's an ordering generated by GW. So how does that order come out? You have to bring in the modal base here to get the ordering, because what else will you order? You need a set of worlds that you want to order. So where will you get that set of worlds? That's the modal base. So bring it back, bring in the modal base. An ordering source, GW, operates on the modal base to yield a ranking of worlds. Okay, so remember, GW is a set of propositions, just like FW. If people remember FW, it was a set of propositions. GW is a set of propositions. Okay, so this set of propositions will look at this modal base and will yield a ranking of worlds. So how does this work? An ordering source determines a partial order. Partial order means not everything inside that unit has to be ordered with respect to each other. Some things can be left having no ordering relationship between each other. So an ordering source determines a partial order on a modal base such that a world W prime comes closer to the ideal set up by GW than a world W prime prime. So this ordering we get if W prime makes more ideal propositions true than W prime does. Okay, where are we getting these ideal propositions? We are getting them from GW. Okay. So breaking it down further, think about it this way. GW takes each world in our modal base and sees how many propositions of GW are true in that world. Okay, the more propositions a world makes true, the more propositions in GW that a world in generalized intersection FW makes true, the higher that world is ranked. Okay, so think of a set of worlds sitting there, comes in an external body of propositions, rules, desires, what have you, and tells you which of the worlds that were sitting together, each world, how many propositions in that external body does it make true? Okay, so depending on that, now suddenly we had an unranked set of worlds, now we have a ranked set of worlds. Okay, and all of these worlds are in the modal base, so not random worlds floating about. Okay, already in the modal base, where all of the propositions in our FW is true. Okay, so here is, let's say, an example. If you assume a deontic ordering source, then GW is a set of laws. If you assume an epistemic ordering source, GW will be a set of facts that you know. If it's a bulleting ordering source, then GW will be a set of desires, etc. So GW, just like FW, can have multiple flavors. It's possible to have multiple flavors. Okay. So now this symbol is showing you, okay, there's going to be a pre-order now based on this set of propositions. So how many laws are being followed in each world? So if you have a deontic ordering source, it cares about how many laws are being followed. So it will give you a ranking of the best worlds or the top worlds or the not so good worlds. Okay. I want to put in a disclaimer that Portner also flags that there are two ways to read this. And this is frustrating. Why are there two ways? But there are two ways. Okay. You can either read it like natural numbers, where the better one is first on the left. Okay. Or you can read it like the actual symbol less than equal to, where the better one is the greater one. So on the right. Okay. So I have been guilty of doing both. Okay. In one recent work, I put, so here you look at this relationship here, V is ranked higher than V prime. Whereas in a previous work, I had W prime prime is ranked higher than W. So I've done both that Portner says, and you'll see it all over the literature. People choose one or the other. I don't know if one person has chosen one over the other. This I just blame on peer pressure, number 17. These people wanted to write it like that. Okay, not my fault. Okay, so anyway, the point being both are true. Both are fine to write, as long as you write in words what you mean, right? So here I'm writing V is ranked higher than V prime. But let's look at what this means, right? What is the ordering source doing more than the notation? So let's look at number 18 because it's a little more natural, the order. Okay, so given worlds W and W prime in your, BK just means model base, it's a different notation from von Fintel and Gillis, forget it, just think of it same as this, okay? So for your world, W prime and W prime prime in a model base, W prime is ranked lower than W prime prime, okay? Or basically to say it, W prime prime is ranked higher than W prime, okay? Let me see what I did here. Did I get the quotation, okay, no. Okay, so the basic idea has to be that the more propositions you make true, the better the world is, right? So this is the subset relation here. So now if you want to say W prime prime, or let's look at 17 for a second. Here's a superset thing. It's the same idea, just flipped. So it's saying that if you have a world V which satisfies this set of propositions, which is given to you by this notation here. This is a set of propositions. And this is better than a world V prime because it makes more propositions true. Okay. So whichever world makes more propositions true, that world is ranked higher than other worlds. Or if they make the equal amount of propositions true, then they're ranked equally. Okay, so and these propositions have to be a part of the ordering source, and then so that's the same for both. And then V prime, this is the way you write, it makes a proposition true. So you say V prime is a P world, or V prime is a Q world, right? So that is how you write that. Okay, so so this is how an ordering source looks like written out, saying that, so for all the worlds that were in your model base that were not ranked, now they are ranked. Okay. So then what we have here is, so whichever way you choose, what you get out of this computation is a ranking of worlds that were previously sitting unranked inside the model base. Okay. So now what about the quantificational domain of modals, right? So the modals are now suddenly sensitive, have to be sensitive to this ranking. Okay, so you need another operator that will pick out the best worlds from this rank set. So now you ended up with a rank set. Now what do? What does the model do? So you need an operator that looks at the rank set and gives you the best worlds. Okay, so there are various ways to write this. We wrote it this way, so I will just present this. So this operator best, okay, looks at your model base, looks at the ordering source, okay, and gives you a set of worlds that of course have to belong in the model base, and gives you this ordering statement which says, give me all those worlds for which there does not exist a world that is better than that world, according to the order given to us by GW. Notice the equality has gone out of this. So we don't want as equally ranked, we want better ranked. Okay, so we want worlds which are the best ranked, basically. So give me a set of worlds for which there is no better ranked worlds, according to the order given by GW. Okay, so this is what best gives you. So now we have ended up with a set of worlds which are best or highest ranked according to, oops, this is my LaTeX code. this is basically this sign, right? Or the pre-order sign that you have here. Okay, so one quick aside before we move on to the final denotation of a modal. We haven't looked at that yet, right? So we want final denotation of the modal, but before looking at it, what happens if the ordering source is infinite? Okay, here is an example. Let's say there is a politician who loves posing with peacocks. Okay, the more the number of peacocks in a picture, the better it is for this politician. So then their GW will look like this. Right? There's a proposition, I have at least one peacock in the picture. There's another proposition, I have at least two peacocks in the picture. I have at least three peacocks in the picture, right? So it's infinite, because the more peacocks, the better. Okay. So what happens when you have this? The result is you can't really have a best world, right? Because there's always another world that is going to be better, because there's another level of proposition that it makes true, the next thing. So let's say if you want to say your best world is where you have 3 peacocks, no, you can't say that, because there might be a world which has 4 peacocks, which is of course better, because the more peacocks, the better. Okay. So this will be, so with infinite sets, it becomes very complex. Like, what do you do? How do you get a quantificational domain? So the idea is people have tackled the possibility of such a crash by adopting the limit assumption. So the limit assumption basically says that orderings used in natural language, we are not talking about, a mathematical point of view. We're just talking in natural language. When you have orderings, there always is a best set. Okay. Now, the limit assumption is not without its, interesting debates. So in the domain of counterfactuals, there has been, heated debate about whether or not to have the limit assumption. So you have Lewis, who has the limit assumption in his account of counterfactuals. Stolnecker doesn't have limit assumptions. There are also these people who agree with Lewis that there should be the limit assumption, etc. So if you're interested in that, you can check these works out. So what people within Criterion modality does is that they adopt the limit assumption for practical reasons. You want some parallelisms with other kinds of quantification, like in the nominal quantifier domain, right? You assume a restricted set of some sort. And just simplicity, you don't want to always think about infinite sets. So for these reasons, limit assumption is adopted. So just wanted to make sure that if any of you are wondering about infinite sets, then this is a way out of that. Okay, so now keeping all of this in mind, what is the criterion semantics for a possibility and necessity model, right? We have done all of this legwork. Now let's see how it looks, what it looks like compositionally. So think about what components you need. So let's say we're dealing with must, just as a representative. You have a modal base, which is a function from worlds to propositions. This bracket should be closed here. An ordering source, sometimes you need it. We'll see what happens when you don't need it. It's also a function from worlds to set of propositions. And you have a function best that have the top ranked worlds, that gives you the top ranked worlds. And this is how you get a doubly relative modality, right? So best is looking at both modal base and ordering source and giving you the top ranked worlds that exist in the model base as ranked by the ordering source. No, Utpal, I think Lewis and Stolnecker position, I have them right. I looked that up. Utpal says he thinks the positions are the other way around. I actually looked that up to make sure I'm not making the other way around, and it is the other way around. Yeah, I mean, it is the way I have it in the handout. Okay, so now how do we write them? How do we write the semantics of models then? Okay, with all of this information. So we formalize it this way in the paper. There are other conceptually similar equivalent ways you could write it. For example, you could write it with the criterion entailment and compatibility notions, right? Instead of the way we have it here. So let's see what this even means. Okay. So for must, you have lambda f, meaning you need to supply it a modal base first. The types are given underneath. Then you sometimes need to, so if you need to, you can give it an ordering source. Now the ordering source can be empty. So that thing might not compositionally play a role. Okay, so then you have your proposition that will sit, underneath the model. And then you're saying that for all worlds that best gives me, keeping these things in mind, P holds in all of those worlds. Okay. Now, if you're worrying about, okay, what about flavor and stuff? All of that has been built in here, remember. Your FW already has some flavor, right? GW also has some flavor if it's present. Okay, so the flavor part has been taken care of in just the semantics of these things. So now we're looking at a higher level thing with putting all of these things together. This is how you write must, and then padega, hoga, chahiye, and your covert modality stuff that we saw with the necessity built in there would all look like this. And then the possibility counterpart would be exactly the same, except quantificational force. Okay. So then your sakna, shayad, these are Hindi, bodha, hoito, these are Bangla, all have, possibility meanings. They all look like this. Okay. I know it's 15 minutes over and I'm about to end, but I wanted to ask if anyone has any questions about these formalizations. Right? We have just built in what we have been seeing so far. Okay, we need a model base, we possibly need an ordering source, and then we do this. Okay, we quantify over the best worlds given from those two things. Okay, so now as soon as you have doubly relative modality, think about it. Think about this. You predict that they cannot match, right? I just said, okay, this has a flavor, that has a flavor, but the flavors may not match. You predict this. Of course, it's possible they don't match. So our theory gives us that prediction. Is that borne out empirically? Do you get non-matching model-based flavor and ordering source flavor? Answer is yes. At least for some models, you do get that. Okay, so here are. And he just does that with must. So can everyone hear me still?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so these are some examples. Checked out. Then the idea is that you have an epistemic model base and you have a doxastic ordering source, which means, what does this mean? Your first quantificational, your first set of propositions is you're accessing via knowledge. Okay. And then you're ordering the worlds that you accessed via knowledge based on what your beliefs are. Okay. You must turn at the next light. First, you start off with circumstantial knowledge. So you know what the reality looks like, let's say. You know you have to, when you see a light, you have to turn, you might have to turn, etc., etc. Okay. The ordering source is, okay, given your goals, you have to turn at the next light. So think about this. If the ordering source was not there, then you could just keep going straight, let's say. You treat a light like a light, you go straight. Okay. But given in the light of your goals, which is an extra imposition, the ordering source, then you turn next at the light. Okay, turn at the next light. So it's the same thing going on here. And I thought that this sentence is a nice one to end on. We all must die. Okay. So you have a circumstantial ordering base, circumstantial model base, and no ordering source. Okay, and as I said, if the ordering source is empty, then all of the worlds compatible with the model base are equivalent with respect. So basically, then you have no best coming out. The best would be the same as the model base. I hope this is clear. So whatever best would, even possibly, if you do this compositionally, if your ordering source is empty, then your modal base is equal to whatever best would produce, because there is no ordering source. Okay. So then you basically quantify over the entire modal base and not just a part of the modal base. Those are the best worlds. But if you have ordering sources, then you take a part of the modal base. So best picks out some worlds that are the best and then gives you, then the model quantifies over that. Okay, so this is all I have. Thank you for listening. I have a question here. There can be
Vyom has a question.
2 levels of modal flavors. What do you mean 2 levels of modal flavors?
So because we have the modal base and then we have the ordering source, right? These are the 2 ways where we are kind of limiting the number of possible worlds where our proposition could hold. So there would be only 2 levels, right? Just like you have shown in 23 that we would have a modal base and then we would have the ordering source. And but I was curious about the cases that we were talking about in the beginning, about how there were different levels of modalities that could be enclosed into one another.
So do you mean graded modality? Or so let me talk to the first part of your comment. So what you're saying, 2 levels, I think your intuition is this thing here, doubly relative modality. So
yes, yeah.
Basically, yes. So you have a modal base and you can sometimes have an ordering source, and the model is sensitive to those 2 things. So that's doubly relative modality. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then yeah, but you can see why maybe the second part of your comment was alluding to that why now you can do things like slide possibility, or there's a good possibility, right? Because now you have worlds which are ranked.
Yeah.
So as soon as you can compare worlds, you can do comparative modality.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, thanks.
Because some worlds are better than the other, right? So then you can say those worlds are included and the others are not included, etc.
Okay.
Yes. So Vyom, I think that talking about using the predicate limiting, no, in fact, right? In fact, it's expanding. Am I right in thinking that, Diti, that because you have 2 orders? Sentence? So I'm saying that, Vyom saying that it is limiting. In fact, it's not limiting. It allows
it's expanding.
you to,
yes, yeah. Expanding. That's what I meant. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you have an ordering source, the function best often gives you a subset of the whole model base. So in case you're thinking, right. So it's expanding in that it's looking at more propositions, right? It's looking at a model base and it's looking at an ordering source. So it's looking at more considerations.
Yes.
But remember, the domain of quantification shrinks.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I'm getting it a little bit here. Thanks.
No, but it's a thing that we need to be conceptually clear about. Yeah. So
yes, but because there are so many, so we haven't discussed the example. So it would be interesting. I would like get back to you with solid examples and how that might work into it. Yes.
Yes. But think about it this way: if you do not have an ordering source, then you're quantifying over your entire model base.
Yes. Yeah, that's clear from 23D.
Right. Yes. But as soon as you have an ordering source, you have a shrunken, if that's a word, set from among the model base.
Yeah. Right. Thanks.
Yeah. I hope people are still awake and not, sorry about this long handout. There's nothing that one can cut when one is talking. It's very vast. I have left out so much, even, just putting this together. So feel free to read Portner and all of these other references I have here. Really, really vast domain here. So sorry for all of the things that I had to, not talk about that you guys are interested in. But
so Didi, maybe at some point, whenever you're, I know that semester starting, etc. But at some point you can come back and now that we have this basic framework of the way, that maybe you could talk about your work on Bangla modals and Hindi modal and other modals, and so that this will become more concretized for everybody. Then this is one way to tackle it.
Yeah, sure. And that's why instead of English examples, I've been trying to use, Hindi examples so that people can sort of see, because in modality, we're often just treated to must and might, and you have to figure out.
Yeah, and particularly evidentials actually, because there is a lot of interest. I mean, it's rampant all over the TV languages, and typological kinds of accounts which just list don't help you really analyze what the hell is happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about evidentiality, which, uses some of these same tools as epistemic reasoning and stuff, but is different. Do we have other questions?
I have a question. So it's a very basic sort
Be heard. Yangshan, you have to do something about your audio.
Hello?
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Am I really not audible at all?
You're audible. Yes.
Okay, I'll just.
It's very low,
I don't know why.
There's a gradation.
Every time I'm on, I'm recording it just, Okay, so, it's a very basic question. I was wondering about infelicity when we use modals, especially the kind of infelicity we get when we use modals the way we use them in Indian English, as opposed to how it's used, how the same, well, at least the same lexical entry is used in other varieties of English. So does it have something to do with a mismatch of modal bases and a mismatch of maybe also rank ordering?
So you want to give me an example of infelicity?
Yeah, so the last example from Portner, the ones which we had, I think the ones that cause the maximum problem when we use them is may. You may do this, and I know the how we use may is that you mean that you're allowed to do it, right? But in Indian English, I think you can use it to mean there's a possibility that you'll do it, or does everybody like always have both?
Right. So you are talking about the possible flavors of may, right? So you can have that flavor.
You can have an epistemic flavor, or
you can have a permission flavor. So deontic.
Yeah. So is that a mismatch of basis or a mismatch of also maybe sometimes a mismatch of ordering? So if there are two people speaking and the infelicity is because one person's modal base doesn't match the other person's modal base. Is that how?
Okay, so there are two different things going on in your comment. First thing, remember, one of the fundamental questions we were trying to answer is, okay, we have one modal have multiple flavors. Like, how do we capture that? Right. So the idea that the insight that we looked at then is, okay, it's not lexical ambiguity. It's different modal flavors given to us by the context. Okay, so the first part of your question is, okay, if may has these two possible flavors, let's say epistemic and deontic, then is it a mismatch? It's not a mismatch, it's a difference in what modal base you're using.
Yeah, that's what I meant. I mean that, one person is using one kind of modal base and the other person is using a different kind.
In the same conversation.
In the
Yes,
same
that's
conversation, right? Okay, okay. So then, so when we look at 23, so it sort of turns out that what we understand, what the meaning of the modal that we get is kind of from the ordering more than from the modal base. So I don't know if it's, so if suppose there's a language where there are kinds of must, like, you know, there's a high level must and there's a middle level must or something, then would the ordering.
So let me jump in here and talk about strong and weak necessity, if you're thinking about that. So high level must can be like, okay, strong necessity, like you have with must in English, versus you can have also a necessity modal, but that's weaker, say should.
Yeah, okay.
So then, yes, crucially, you have hit the nail on the head. A lot of people have analyzed the difference between must and should in terms of ordering sources. Most prominently, we have Quantintel and Yatsudu, who did that with ought, and then before that we have Copley, we have Swanson. We have a bunch of people who argue that the difference between two necessity modals like must and should is due to the sensitivity to ordering sources. So the basic idea is should is sensitive to more ordering sources than must.
Okay.
Okay. So you can get differences in strength. So I mean, there is at least one prominent school of thought where differences in strength is due to sensitivity to different kinds of ordering sources. Right. So for example, if you say, oh, I want to go from Calcutta to Delhi, okay, I want to take a train, but I also want it to be fast. Okay. So suppose you tell me I want to go from Calcutta to Delhi, and I say, oh, you must take the Duronto or whatever, Duronto Express, or you have to take the Duronto Express. And then I say, oh, but I also wanted, I want to have some scenery or something. Maybe the route of the Duronto doesn't take you through, any nice scenery. So then I say, oh, then you should take the Rajdhani. You see what I'm saying? So both are necessity models, but one is weaker than the other because it's sensitive to more information. And more information in this kind of a system means ordering sources. So extra information, how is that built in? That's not in your model base. Extra information, not in your model base, but you're sensitive to it. How is that? It's because of this extra set of propositions that the ordering source brings.
Oh, this way is a question.
So, Deeti, is syntax sensitive to this world of modal bases and ordering relations at all? So, this is semantics of it. Does syntax operate completely divorced from it?
You can have syntax overtly playing a role in things like this, if you say these things. If you say these things, then you're syntactically specifying.
That's contextual specification.
I mean, syntax meaning, you overtly say it with this structure of a clause. That's as much as syntax comes into this. Yeah. Okay. Syntax plays a role with other aspects of modals. So for example, remember yesterday I said I won't be able to talk about scopal interaction of modals with negation and stuff like that. So then comes in syntax, where is the negation? Linear order. Okay, does the modal take scope over the negation at LF or in the syntax in some languages? Right. So then you look at, okay, what is the scope of what reading do you get? Is the modal a negative polarity item or is it a positive polarity item? Can it occur in the scope of negation? Like, then you think about those things. Then when you think about its interaction with other scopal operators, then the syntax comes into play more or less.
Okay. Thank you.
But just in between yesterday and today, I just tried to show you basic modal semantics, where we arrive at this 21 and 22, what we had to do to even arrive at these denotations. Where we can say, okay, parega looks like 21 and shayad looks like 22. To even arrive at this, we had to, go through all of the material. So it's just basic denotations of the model. But now when you look at other properties, like, okay, interactions in the same sentence with other things, then you look at the syntax in more detail and then see. But even then, a lot of the accounts are semantic, okay, so scope and stuff, what theory of scope you believe in and stuff. But
so Diti, I can think of a pair, which Miriam Bhatt pointed out. It's not in my variety of Hindi, but I know that she's absolutely correct for a certain Punjabi version of Hindi, variety of Hindi. So Nadia ne zoo jana hai and Nadia ko zoo jana hai. In the Nadia ko zoo jana hai, she glosses, I think, more is obligation, as obligation, whereas the other is just
Volition.
bulletic. So there's nothing in the modal field in terms of overt realization, which suggests that you get different case relations. So I think ruling out that the syntax doesn't care. I mean, I don't know what you think about these two examples, not in terms of their judgments. So I know that Bangla speakers love to give judgments about Hindi. But I mean, I think that maybe it's a little too soon to say that there's like zero implication for the syntax.
No, I take that back. Not zero implications. Yes, in some, okay, let's say that this way. English, let's say, doesn't care in its syntax. Or just in the basic semantics, it doesn't bring in the syntax. But it's superbly interesting that you see in the variety of Hindi that you mentioned that case differs based on what flavor of modality.
Right.
And one should work on this. Like, clearly there is a covert modal, let's say here, right?
Yeah.
You have your covert modal, but what the flavor of the covert modal is reflected in the case marking, right? So my point of view would be, okay, the covert modal is analyzed analyzed this way, and then the case marking reflects that semantics.
Right.
Rather than the case marking regulates the.
Yeah, so I mean, I wonder that, and I think that if one looked at Indo-Aryan, which is so impoverished in terms of different modal auxiliaries, that one would be able to see this pattern much more. So then it would be a question really whether it's the ordering relation or the, and so in one sense what Yangchen was asking, I thought, was, I mean, you answered it, but you answered it from the perspective of an intra-language. So whereas across languages, so if Indian English speakers do make what British English or American English speakers call wrong use of the modal, is this a variation, just a different specification in the modal base or in the ordering relation? Is this a productive area of study to think about? That is it that, so if you speak some beast called e-language called English, is it the case that you're really differing around just ordering, or are you differing in the modal base itself? And then the question of whether this reduces to really finding a way to be able to put in lexical specification covertly into the system. If you look at intra-language variation, because I think Singaporean English and let's look at, they have very, very different orders. Or for example, languages, dialects that allow many modals to co-occur. Liverpudlian English is one of the kind. So I'm wondering whether, it's whether this approach, the semantics might have much more to say and would be enriched by looking at variation per se. So it's a bit of a rambling comment, but I mean, this is very interesting because I don't think that we can rule out any of the propositions that I'm saying right now based on what we know.
Yes. So I think more and more people are studying variation in modal semantics, in modality generally, from the perspective of syntax, from the perspective of semantics, the interface. I think it's a very productive area. And I would strongly urge those students who are so inclined to, really get into the data and see what regulates. So what are the reflexes of different flavors in the language? Let's say case marking is a reflex, or some other syntactic orders might be reflexes. Like what is the nature of the data? It's just, there's mind-boggling variation out there, and people are really studying it. So I think it's definitely a very good route to pursue, because some of the logical stuff, they are constant. Like properties of modal bases. An epistemic modal base has to have positive introspection. Like that's those kind of things. You don't think about them in terms of variation. They're just mathematical properties. Right? The variation can come from, okay, do you have a variable force model? So some languages like Statumchets, spoken in Canada, it is argued to have variable force models. So a model, the same model can have a necessity flavor in some contexts and a possibility flavor in other contexts. We haven't even looked at those in this workshop. We have been assuming, okay, padega is always obviously going to have a necessity force. Sakna always going to have possibility force. The flavor might differ. So what we've looked at is, you can call it variable flavor, right? But there are also variable force models.
Right.
So those are the kinds of variation, like what are the restrictions on these interpretations? What are the syntactic or semantic or pragmatic restrictions? And there's a lot to be done. There is very little work done on South Asian modality. And there's a lot to be done. So I would strongly urge anyone who's interested in this cluster of topics to look at. This is very productive. To answer your question, if this is, really a thing one can contribute to, the answer is yes, very much.
Great.
Any more questions?
I will correct all the typos. That union should be intersection. A bunch of brackets are now closed here and there. So I will correct these and send it to your ASAP. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
And we will impose a new again.
Okay, sounds good. I hope people enjoyed. I know some of this was sort of, abstract and maybe new for some people, but this is like one of the fundamental topics in natural language. Right?
So maybe we can have a picture.
Oh.
Yeah.
So we can take a picture of everybody. Please turn on your videos. And there are lots of people that I don't know here. So it was great that students and researchers from all over India and the world, I guess, were here. And thank you very much. And this was really pleasurable. Thank you so much, Didi. And Sakshi might want to say thanks too.
Yeah, thank you, Didi. Thank you so much. This was absolutely wonderful. We learned so much and it was really great. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. And I often don't get time to talk about, I don't get the opportunity to talk about Padega and Sapta and all that with my, American students, or for them to even appreciate I am very happy to have been able to, talk to you guys about both the technical and the empirical aspects of this stuff.
Okay, so I'll take a screenshot one by one if anybody can switch on their videos. It have COVID. Yeah.
So we'll put up the recordings on the Fling website.
Okay.
And please do publicize the website so that, because we plan to have more stuff from people who are the newest experts in the field. And thank you all for joining.
Yeah, we should have, some people might not have their videos on, it's fine.
Okay, see you everyone. Thank you so much for being a
Thank
part
you.
of
Thanks
Thank
a
you.
bunch, Diti. It was really great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.